Welcome to episode number 246, where Dr. Claudia Welch returns to the podcast to discuss the very important topic of the emotional transition from the Pitta Stage of Life into the Vata Stage of Life, and how each dosha type can experience it differently, and how to apply our energy in a different way so we have a smooth transition into the wisdom stage of life. So please stay tuned. Welcome to the Elements of Ayurveda podcast. I'm your host, Colette, and I hope to educate and empower you to take charge of your health and well-being, preventing disease in the body and mind so that you can thrive in life. I will be sharing the holistic teachings of Ayurveda, which is the ancient healing tradition from India. Now, if you're new to Ayurveda, I recommend listening to the first couple of episodes where I do an introduction to Ayurveda and the mind-body types. And if you like the content, please be sure to subscribe or follow the podcast so the new episodes will automatically download for you. Also, you may want to check out my private Elements community, which is away from social media. It's a safe space for like-minded people to come together, to connect, to share, to support each other, and to continue the conversation from the podcast episodes. Check out the link in the show notes or visit my website, elementshealingandwellbeing.com, and just click on the community tab. And I hope to connect with you there. Thanks for listening. And now here's a new episode. This episode is sponsored by Kerala Ayurveda, who invites you to learn how to live harmoniously with nature's rhythms, including the seasons, life stages, and more. The science of life can empower you and give you the tools to help others. Study entirely online or in person with the freedom to shift as your journey unfolds. To learn more, visit keralaayurveda.us/courses. And for $100 off tuition, use the reference code ELEMENTS100 when you join a first level certification. And you can find all that information in the show notes. Hello and welcome back to the Elements of Ayurveda podcast. Today, I'm very happy to welcome back Dr. Claudia Welch, who has been a lifelong student of life and medicine. She's practiced Ayurveda, is licensed as a doctor of Oriental medicine, and authored Balance Your Hormones, Balance Your Life, Achieving Optimal Health and Wellness Through Ayurveda, Chinese Medicine, and Western Science, and The 4 Qualities of Effective Physicians, Practical Ayurvedic Wisdom for Modern Physicians. Dr. Welch has lectured internationally on Oriental medicine and Ayurveda, exploring how Eastern medicine applies to women's health and today's reality in general. Dr. Welch, it's a pleasure to have you back on the podcast. Thank you for joining us today.
It's so nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me back, and hello, everybody.
Well, I am really looking forward to this conversation, Dr. Welch. We're talking about the emotional transition from the Pitta stage of life into the Vata stage of life. And this is something that comes up over and over again in my consultations. And I feel that it's not talked about enough because there can be a challenge during this transition. And I think it can be more challenging for some constitutions more than others. And we're going to dive deep into this today. But before I get too ahead of myself, let's talk about what are the stages of life according to Ayurveda. And let's set that foundation first, please.
Certainly. So there's two fundamental ways of looking at this that Ayurveda accepts. One is through the doshas. So people who are familiar with Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. Kapha governs childhood, Pitta governs middle age, and Vata governs older age. So roughly, let's say Kapha goes to about 25, 30, Pitta picks up and keeps things going until about menopause, really. So 20, 25 years, something like that. And leaves off around 55, let's say, and then Vata picks up. Now, none of these timings and ages are perfect, and it's not a a very quick transition. Usually it's a gradual transition. But that's one way that we look at it. And very briefly, anybody who's not familiar with that, kapha, we can see in the juiciness, the earth and water elements expressing through the juiciness of childhood, and kids always having a cold and being a little plump and that kind of thing. And the pitta, is associated often with ambition and drive and doing things and spreading yourself a bit thin sometimes, spreading your name. You might become well known in your profession. You address your profession and the raising of your children and this kind of thing. It's a very busy time of life, and a hot time of life. That's when often ulcers happen and gastritis and things like that. And then this is just such a brief thumbnail sketch, right? But then the third stage of life is Vata, and Vata is more delicate in constitution and imaginative and investigative into the inner worlds and artistic and dry. The skin gets drier. The lubricants of the body get drier. They tend to, and we tend to get lighter either in body or mind or both. So maybe a little bit more scattered memory problems. Those kinds of things can happen, and so there's a lightening that happens with that. So that's one framework. But I also want to bring in this other framework that we accept very much in Ayurveda, which is the 4 stages of life. Mm-hmm. And I'm bringing this in because it will really magnify why and how this transition from Pitta to Vata stage of life is so powerful, so important. Is that okay, Colette, if I give a little overview of that?
That would be excellent. Thank you so much.
Okay, good. So the 4 stages of life that are widely accepted, not only in Ayurveda, but in many philosophical and knowledge systems in India, are, if you break the lifespan for convenience of math into 100 years, each stage is 25 years long, let's say. The first stage is the student phase, brahmacharya, where we're learning how to navigate life, and we're learning morals and learning what we need to get through life. Second stage, grahastha, 25 to 50. This is very associated with the Pitta stage of life, and it's about it's related to artha, getting stuff that makes us feel secure, and grahastha is householder. So this is the time where we're building our houses, raising our children, very invested in our jobs and our professions, etc., getting all the initials, the SUVs, the HDTVs, and the PhDs, and whatever, if we are in a position to do that in whatever place we are in the world and in our lives and finances. We may not be gathering all of those things particularly, but it's always this very busy time. Then from 50 to 75, we go into the vanaprastha stage of life, which is the forest dweller stage of life. And in this stage of life, it's talked about one of 2 ways. One, either you go completely into retreat, and the second is you go partially into retreat. You come out of retreat and support the younger generations with the wisdom that you've gleaned, and you go back into retreat to start to water and nourish your internal reality and journey more, because we know that we don't have forever on this planet, and we start to prioritize more of a subtle reality. The 4th stage of life, roughly 75 to death, is the sannyas stage, where we renounce all of these things we've been doing in the world, and we really fully turn our attention towards the internal and the beyond. That's one way of looking at it. The second way of looking at it is, as you recall, there's 2 ways of looking at vanaprastha. one being half in, half out, half retreat, but the other being full retreat. If we've taken that full retreat in Vanaprastha, this is the time where we come out and we share what we've gained from that retreat with the world. But either way, when we look at this, we see these first two stages being very about navigating the world and building our security within the world and building our lives within the world. And that takes an enormous amount of effort. And the second stage is pulling ourselves gradually away from the worldly arenas and concerns and bringing us to a more investigative, alive, active relationship with our internal selves. So we can see with these two models of stages that the transition from Pitta to Vata is roughly equal to the transition of Grahastha to Vanaprastha. So it's which is also the transition from the first half of life to the second half of life. So we're narrowing in on this combination of transitions from the first point of view, from the doshic point of view, the transition from the Pitta stage of life to the Vata stage of life, roughly at menopause for women. And for this other 4-stage model, that same time period is marks the transition between Grahastha, this very active, ambitious stage of life, to the more either half in retreat or fully in retreat stage of life that goes with the Vanaprastha, which literally translates as forest dweller. So there's this tremendous emphasis on this junction. So thanks for letting me introduce both of those.
It's great to see how they're both in alignment with each other. One supports the other. And also it gives us even more detail when we look at the 4 stages of life as well. And this is why this is so important to talk about, Dr. Welch, because our society is not supporting this right now. And people are suffering as a consequence, right? Because we're told to push through in all stages of life and be productive. So we see that this Pitta energy in the Pitta stage of life is providing lots of energy, like you said, for all that spreading that we do, building a career, family, home, and it's beneficial. What I'd love to talk about now is what's happening towards the end of this Pitta stage of life, moving into this Vata stage of life. I've talked in detail about menopause and andropause on the podcast before. I'm talking about in regards emotionally what's happening in the body today. I'd love to discuss that.
Beautiful, Colette. So it's really good. And I mean, so much is happening. I mean, just the fact that we're going from the first half of life to the second half of life, there's so much happening. And I can't help but kind of focus this on what's happening with women, that being the area in my professional life that I've worked most with, and being a woman. So I will probably do that, but let's look at some of the major things that are happening that aside from, like you said, aside from menopause, which is huge, but let's look at some of this more energetic, emotional, massive change that's happening. First of all, it's massive. Let's look at it in a couple ways. There's no particular rhyme or reason with what I'm going to bring up first here. So I think I'm going to take the word energy that you just used. You said in the Pitta time of life, we have all this energy to do everything we're doing. What happens when I want to look at that word energy and what our relationship to that word and to that experience throughout this transition. I think that, one of the things we hear a lot as practitioners and friends with other women going through menopause and going from the Pitta Stage of Life to the Vata Stage of Life, or the Grahasta householder stage to the forest dweller Vanaprastha stage, is, oh, I don't have the energy that I used to have. I can't do what I used to do. And when I've investigated this, I've found this not necessarily to always be true. It is maybe something that we tell ourselves because we recognize that something is very different. We're going about things differently. But let me propose a possibility here. It may not be that we don't have the energy that we used to have. There's different possibilities. One possibility is we're just tired. We don't have to compare it to what was before. We're tired. And we have a bizarre relationship to tired in Western modern society, where maybe we've become enlightened about, okay, when I'm hungry, I'm going to eat, and I'm going to eat something nourishing and good for me, and whatever. We've worked that out. Okay, I'm thirsty. I know that I need to drink water, drink something when I'm thirsty. We get that. There can be emotion around that, but it's fairly straightforward. However, when we're tired, there's this different thing that happens for a lot of us where we go, what's wrong? Something must be wrong. I'm tired. I must be sick. Whereas it's just like hunger. It's just like thirst. It's a physiological need that we need to address. So take a nap, take 2 naps, take 6 months on the couch, take what we need to take for a while if we're tired. And that can happen earlier in life too, and we've just been ignoring it. But so the first possibility is, yes, you're tired. So rest. That in the same way that you'd eat when you're hungry, drink when you're thirsty, rest when we're tired. So that's a possibility. Another possibility is that we're getting wiser, that we never did have the amount of energy we thought we did. We had stress, and that was pushing us and driving us. And we had ambition, and that was pushing us and driving us. And so we pushed and we drove, and we pushed and we drove. And now we're wiser, and we're thinking, no, that's not right. I can't ignore this inner message anymore that is not right. It's not right to continue to push. It's not right to continue to sacrifice everything at the altar of ambition. And we stop doing that. And we actually pay attention to the fatigue that we've actually had for a long time. I think that happens a lot. And before I go further, I just want to give a breathing space for you, Colette.
No, this is fantastic. I want to allow you to flow, but I totally agree. And the fact that absolutely that we're getting wiser, but also as we age, we do have less resources, available. I think that we can push through in our 20s and 30s. And like you said, we're running on adrenaline and ambition. But we do have less resources as we go through the Pitta stage and go through towards the Vata stage of life.
Beautiful. And I would reframe that just a little bit and say we have a little less brawn. It's not necessarily that we have less resources, because we may have more wisdom. And there are many ways, as they say, to skin a cat, which is a horrible metaphor, but there's many ways to get things done is the point.
Yes.
One is through brawn, and one is through wisdom and patience.
Very true.
So we have more resources available to us, God willing, provided we've given ourselves the time and space to put ourselves in the way of lofty ideals, right? Lofty ideals being patience and wisdom. And if we've availed ourselves of inspirational sources for this, and we've cultivated it in ourselves, we have more wisdom, we have more resources to face what we need to face, but brawn may not be one of them. Pushing through, and certainly we have less estrogen, we have less progesterone. Those are very building, nourishing qualities, and so we have less of that buffer against stress. But And so that's very true. But if we reframe that and say, oh, I have a different way of approaching this, and this is going to be easier and more beautiful, and is going to help me on my inner journey as well as my outer journey to get patience and wisdom on board more, prioritize that over pushing for things.
Absolutely. Yes, I totally agree on that. Yes, if we are wise, we will have extra resources to do things in a different way rather than the pushing mentality that we may have had in the early Pitta stage.
Yes. And so a couple more things about energy. And there's so much to be said about this transition. It's such an incredible time of life.
Mm-hmm.
But a couple more things about energy. And this is maybe going to sound like a cop-out, but hear it through, is sometimes I think we have the same amount of energy, but just for different things. Mm. And the different thing might be sitting and looking out the window. And that may sound ludicrous. Oh, you don't have the energy to be driving around all day and pursuing all this stuff, but you have energy to sit and look out a window. That doesn't take energy. But in a way it does. And we can sit there, look out the window, commune with nature, and feel no lack of energy. We may not feel fatigued. We may feel nourished by that. And it's just that we have less energy for what we used to do. It's just reframing that. And it's because this is can be an incredibly beautiful time of life, as well as it has its challenges. But to feel like we're not betraying ourselves, we're not letting ourselves down by sitting by the window, looking outside, communing with nature, that's not a lack of energy. That's applying energy towards a very important relationship, which is to say with nature, with ourselves, with what bubbles up from the core of ourselves.
Beautifully put. Absolutely. And I love that you said we're not betraying ourselves when we're doing things in a more easeful way. But as I mentioned earlier, unfortunately, our modern society doesn't educate us very well on this transition. And therefore, I think that when we become identified with this doing phase in the Pitta stage of life, it's very hard for us to be okay with leaving that identity. Like, it's almost like an identity crisis. And I've in my consultation spoke with some people who feel like, what's going on with me? I'm losing my mojo here, because you become identified to that doing. And of course, everybody experiences it differently. But what are your thoughts on that?
It's beautiful, Colette. And I too have seen that a lot. And so let's look at something that's particular to Pitta. So we're looking at the Pitta stage of life going into the Vata stage of life. And this can be particularly difficult for Pitta individuals.
Agreed, 100%.
And so let's look at a couple of inherent life lessons with the doshas. Mm-hmm. Because the one with Pitta applies very much here. Yes. And this is not from the classics. This is just from my experience, from what I've seen, but I think it'll make sense. The Vata person has to learn the Vata person has a delicate mind and a delicate body. So they need to learn how to protect that, and to build and nourish themselves, right? Kapha person has a very strong body, and has a sort of a medium strength mind. A medium strength meaning it's not defined by sharpness. It has a nice balance of it has a nice softness to it, right? And so they need to stimulate themselves to move with the softness of the mind and the density of the body and the strength of the body. They need and thrive on stimulating that. The Pitta person has an interesting thing. We have a very strong mind, but we have a delicate body. And our mind is so strong, the intellect is so strong that kind of takes over. And first of all, we start to believe that our body is strong too, because we're identified with the mind and with that sharpness and that strength of the mind and the intellect. And because that's so strong, we think we're strong, but we start noticing in the Pitta stage of life that our body is weak and it can't keep up with what the mind and the ambition and the drive is leading us towards. And so like a little nagging brother, kid sister, kid cousin getting in the way, the body says, hey, wait for me. I can't get there yet. And the mind, our identification with the mind, we think that that's us. And so we say, shut up, little kid sister, little kid brother, little body that I don't care about from the neck down. I'm prioritizing from the neck up. And this is important and we can do this. And the body does the very best it can, but it starts breaking down more. And we start throwing medicines at it, whether they're herbal medicines or antacids from the pharmaceutical counter at the drugstore. Right. We start throwing things at the body to make it keep up, darn it, because it's betraying our ambition. And so the medicine for eventually Pitta people generally start bleeding out of one orifice or another before they really get that this isn't working, that their body isn't as strong as as we thought it was, that it's the mind that's strong, but not necessarily wise. Because if it was wise, it would see that this isn't working for the organism as a whole. So we start to be forced to surrender to the pace of the body and to surrender ambition at the altar of reality. And the reality is the body is too delicate to keep up with the demands of the ambition and the drive. This happens more and more from age 35 on for hormonal reasons and so forth that we won't get into because we're not specifically talking about menopause, but it happens tremendously around menopause. So tremendously around this transition from Pitta to Vata, the body's delicacy has increased. It is intolerant of maintaining this unhealthy dynamic and relationship. And we need to surrender to that. And when we do, we feel like our heads are being cut off, because in a way they are, because our head, which is from the neck up, is all the intellectual thinking, thought, strong ambition stuff that's what we've been identifying with. That's what we have to sacrifice. We have to sacrifice our head. So it feels like we're killing part of ourselves because that's what we've identified with. And so it is. That is what's happening.
Yeah. And I think this is extremely important, because I'm sure many of us working in Ayurveda see this over and over again. I'm Pitta Kapha. I've experienced it in my own body. But that's it. If we don't listen to our body's needs, if we don't give ourselves permission to be more rather than always doing, and that ambitious drive, competitive drive, we're literally going to burn out, right? Or we're going to have a fired up, burning menopause, all Pitta aggravations.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's a very difficult thing to come to. And usually in the Pitta phase of life, which is also the Grihastha stage of life, householder, we've experienced, most Pitta people have experienced some pretty serious meltdowns of the body in the body's, attempts to keep up with Pitta. But if we have the support, the gentle, loving, kind, empathetic support that we need, if we give it to ourselves, there's something really beautiful that happens. First of all, the mind is not just contained within the body. The brain, according to Ayurveda, from certain perspectives in Ayurveda and certain perspectives in Western medicine as well, the brain is not contained in the head. It's partially contained in the head, but the entire body is part of the process. So the Manovahasrotas, the channel system of the mind in Ayurveda, it says that the root of the channel system of the mind is actually in the heart, and that the channel system of the mind is spread out through the entire body. And so often that helps, I think, to understand as a Pitta individual that we've been getting it a little wrong. Okay, we're pretty bright, but we've been getting it a little wrong because we've been confining the brain to the head. And if we realize that there's great intelligence in the body, and that we are joining with an intelligence greater than our own mental capability, then life becomes more rounded, more sweet. We can also start to tap into certain desires. And that third stage of life is, interestingly enough, also associated with kama, with desire, which is one of the four aims of life. Mm-hmm. And during this time, we actually get to come to terms with some deeper desires than pushing and driving and ambition. That what's under that? Maybe it's tea with a girlfriend. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's sitting and looking out the window. Maybe these things, we've had a deep desire to do them, and we haven't had the time, we haven't given ourselves the time or the permission to do them because of our prioritizing the head. So yes, it's a sacrifice. It's a sacrifice of the head.
Yeah, so well said. And I think that word permission is important, because I find in my experience that those of us with a high Pitta constitution and that tremendous drive, that you almost do need permission. Like, it's okay to slow down. You don't have to be going all out 110% all the time. And like you said, life is more sweet, and it takes a little bit of humility as well. Yes, you're bright, you're competitive, you're ambition, you're a great leader, but be humble in the fact that there's so much more to life. It can be much more holistic, and you can get joy and get that feeling of satisfaction from much more nurturing ways of being in the world too.
Yes. And I think one of the beautiful invitations of this transition from Pitta to Vata is to beckon us into new experiences, and this experience, a sweeter experience. And I think that along with this beckoning, this sweet beckoning, Pitta first needs to be convinced intellectually that this is important to do.
Yeah. Yes.
And so, there's the Balance Your Hormones, Balance Your Life book, and there's the Women's Health and Hormones, Part 1, Hormonal Balance and Stagnation. That's an online course that I offer, which is it's very much about, in some ways, setting up the intellectual parameters for why this has to happen, why we need to make this change, how we can do it in a healthy way. And when Pitta is convinced, then it's likely, then Pitta can get on board. But then we need the sweetness, and we start to get addicted to sweetness, and remember that sweet is a taste that actually pacifies Pitta. So the more we get in touch with the sweetness, the more we'll be willing to prioritize this part of our life, this slower pace. I just have to say, I paused for a second because there's this little red squirrel on my apple tree going to the end of it and getting the apples that are not ripe yet, stealing them and going off.
adorable. Adorable. Yes. I can hear the frogs in the background, the birds. It's so beautiful for an Ayurveda podcast that you're immersed in nature. I love it.
I love it too.
It's great. I'm taking a moment out here to let you know that if you're looking for support on your Ayurvedic journey, I have the group discounted digestive reset cleanse coming up September 2nd. So this cleanse is to help us transition from the seasons. It doesn't matter whether you're in the northern or southern hemisphere, because the cleanse comes in a 90-minute consultation where I will tailor the recipes, the yoga, the pranayama, the mindfulness practices to you, your lifestyle, and the climate where you are. So if you're interested in joining us in this group Digestive Reset Cleanse starting September 2nd, we go through it in a group format. Everything's recorded, so there's no live component besides from the 90-minute one-to-one consult with me. But you'll have access to a private web page, and that's where all the webinars are recorded, the yoga videos, and lots of extra info there. And there's also a private forum where you can communicate with all the other people taking part from around the world. So just visit my website, elementshealingandwellbeing.com. You go to the events tab for the September 2nd discounted group cleanse. Or if you want to do it at another time and choose your own dates, it's the same setup, same structure. You can do a private cleanse, and you can find that under programs. And I'll also put the link in the show notes. Okay, let's go back to my conversation with Dr. Claudia Welch. Very good point that a person with a high Pitta constitution needs to be intellectually convinced that this is how working with this transition in a mindful way means you will have a less fiery menopause. It means that you will be more nurtured and nourished and more balanced, and that it's okay. It's okay to go through this, but also that it's this kind of handing off as well. Particularly with Pitta in their careers, right? Very ambitious, but there's also that transition in your career, and that it's okay if you're getting that feeling, which I experience a lot in my consultations, people saying, I'm managing all these people and I don't want to do it anymore. Or I'm head of this organization and I feel I don't want to have all this responsibility anymore. And it's like, it's okay. Part of this transition is now to go into the forest dweller stage, and preparing for that is this handing off of responsibilities.
Yes. And there's an interesting thing for me that's happened that I don't know will happen for everybody. But I think that there's some aspects of it, at least, that do happen, maybe potentially universally. Mm-hmm. I remember my Guruji saying one time that there comes a point in the life of a spiritual aspirant where they live their whole life for others. And I always found that very interesting. What I knew he didn't mean is in this codependent way that overstretches and overuses our resources and depletes us in order to support somebody else. I knew that that's not what he was saying. And I didn't in my own life have this Mother Teresa kind of, I want to serve everybody feeling. I was interested in puzzles and intellectual puzzles and pursuits. And that was what I was interested in. And I promised my guru when I got initiated that I would be true to myself. And so when I looked at these things together and saw at a certain point, it's natural for life to become about living it for others. But I didn't have this impulse to go out and serve people. And I also didn't have the energy for it at the time. I wondered how that was going, if I was going to do that and stay true to myself and my nature, how that was going to unfold. And I've started to see how that unfolds right now I'm 53. And when I was going into this transition from Grihastha to Vanaprastha, and I think it's a gradual transition, I really wrapped up my professional life where it was, which it involved things on a lot of levels. On one level, this very mundane, but very important level, I had to organize everything really well to be able to not have to pay so much attention to it. Because if it wasn't well organized, I was always worried about it. So I spent some time doing that. I literally got my affairs in order with a lawyer and so forth, and prepared to die in a way. I wanted to get everything off my plate,
right?
So that I could experience what it was like to not identify as much with anything else, to identify with the emptiness, to go to the emptiness, and that could be a long conversation. And it's not like, oh, I love having nothing to do. I go on vacation for 2 weeks and have nothing to do. It's not that level. That's not what I'm talking about. It's get everything off the plate, have an emptiness that's really uncomfortable, trust that emptiness, and see what comes out of that emptiness. And what happened was very surprising to me. What I was wanting, in a way, was get everything off the plate so that I can meditate and have a more have more time for spiritual pursuits. And what happened was this sort of, I'm going to use the word vision, but it wasn't like the Bible rays coming down from clouds or anything, but this sort of vision came to me with so much power that I couldn't ignore it. And it did involve me rolling up my sleeves again in a certain way, but it wasn't for me. It was for the need of the moment, and I started seeing, oh, I'm not doing this for myself. This is partly how this is going to look for me, is living my life for others is about not living it for myself, for my own survival. We have to get that in place in Grihastha. But when we have space, something for me came in, and it's not just going out in political activism, although there's some of that. It's another project sort of to connect, that connects people, that invites us into deeper, more spiritual, more philosophical discussions, because that's so at the root of our belief systems. And the belief systems really has what's been driving us into disease, for,
Right.
So it's working with things on a very different level.
Beautiful. And I love that you went through that transition by getting your affairs in order and then having this emptiness to see what came up next. And like you said, trusting that emptiness, and that it's such a great way to do this gradual process, to gradually get your affairs in order, whether that's, training somebody else in your job, or talking to your lawyer and getting everything organized with your family and so on. But doing that gradually over a period of time, because it sets that foundation for, okay, there is going to be a transition here. And it's like a ritual almost, that when you start doing these getting your affairs in order and so on, and that this is now how you're serving through community.
Yes, it's really something. And it wasn't always easy. I mean, when this emptiness would come, okay, so I get everything off my plate, and it turns out I can't meditate 8 hours a day. I'm not doing it. And so I would be in kind of idle pursuits, as I was sort of distracting myself from meditation or this or that thing. And so that was kind of empty, as like, oh, this is meaningless, but I was waiting for the miracle. There was part of that. And during that time, I would sometimes ask myself, am I sacrificing everything for nothing?
Right.
And there was this deep trust saying, just trust. just trust the emptiness, trusting that space and developing patience. Patience was never a strong suit for me, but then when this sort of vision came and I started working with it and cooperating with it, it was a lot of work and sometimes didn't happen at the pace that I wanted. I'd kind of revert to the 35-year-old brain going like, oh, this should happen right away. But no. And especially since it was with a group of people, I ended up a group of people kind of coalesced around this vision and we all started working with it. And when you're working with a group, there's 8 of us. And when you're working with 8 people and trying to do everything by consensus, it doesn't move fast. And I just kept feeling like, okay, this is not mine. This is a vision. We're working with this. That means this vision has a life. I'm just cooperating with it. It is not my decision, the timeline of this, how this works and when it's going to work and when this is going to happen. That somehow, and there's a lot I could say about this, but I maybe not today, about this role of patience. But the nutshell of it is I've come to believe that patience is perhaps one of the most radical acts of rebellion we can make, meaningful acts of rebellion we can make in this world of constant pushing. And why is this rebellion important from this flip side? It's not just a rebellion. It looks like a rebellion, but what it is a deep act of alignment with the best possible nature of the universe.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, beautiful. So can you tell us a little bit more about this community?
Certainly. It's a community and a website that aims to orient people to Vedic knowledge systems and help us explore it. Help us explore these systems and connect these systems and connect each other through this process. So the website is satsangam.net, satsangam.net. And Sat means truth and Sangam is confluence. So it's a confluence of truths or truth, right? So the truth through Ayurveda, truth through Jyotish, truth through dance, truth through art, where they come together and having people come together in these things. And we really want this not to be about a particular personality or charismatic leader, but a platform for many teachers over, God willing, many generations, teachers and students. I mean, we all want to be teachers somehow, but really the essence is like serious students, dedicated students coming together, students of different Vedic knowledge systems coming together. And, there's a oneness behind that variety and many different doorways to that oneness. So we're just picking all the doorways. Let's take any doorway A, B, or C. Let's go into it and explore it and see how that takes us to the one. And one of the ways that this applies is actually, if you go onto that site and you click on Life Map, it'll take you to this map where on the left side of the map, there's a lot of the things we do, the sciences and the arts, the Ayurveda and the dance and Sanskrit and things we might be doing. And on the right side, we have the things that may be inspiring us or have the potential to inspire how we do what we do. So this might be philosophical systems, the looking at the world through yoga philosophy or Sankhya philosophy or Vedanta or something like that. And so introduces us to this vast world of possibilities of inspiration. And you can see transiting through that life map, you can see the 4 stages of life, starting at the left and moving to the right. And so you can see this transition that we're talking about being between the householder stage and the forest dweller stage, being right in the middle. That transition is right in the middle of this map, where we have on one side what we've been doing, and on this other side, what's inspired us. And in this second stage of life, we get more invested in exploring what inspires us.
Yeah, that's beautiful. What a great community you're building. And I think so needed as well, to have this really holistic outlook and getting inputs and from all different aspects.
I'm excited about it. I'm looking forward to it. It's like, how do you bring people together, and how do you bring these ideas together, and in a way that really does inspire us and focuses on that more than kind of what we're doing, how we're doing it. How do we do that? And my friend and colleague, Dr. Ram Kumar, and I are scheduled to start this satsangam membership course in October, where the plan is to invite representatives from all these different Vedic knowledge systems and introduce a concept that runs through all of these things, whether that concept is prana or shakti or yoga or the 5 elements or or the 4 stages of learning or the 4 stages of life. There's many concepts that underlie and influence all of these Vedic knowledge systems, not just Ayurveda. And so we plan to invite members from these other Vedic knowledge systems, pick a topic, say prana versus shakti, and have one person talk about those concepts from an Ayurvedic point of view, and have somebody else talk about how they work with those in their dance or traditional martial art practice.
Wow.
And I think that this will help us find new possibilities of ways of breathing life into these stale concepts, or these concepts that have become too fixed. They're not really fixed concepts. They're really rich concepts. They're multidimensional concepts. And I think that'll help us not only in our chosen field, but in life, because these concepts apply not only to all Vedic knowledge systems, but to our lives.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And it's really about that curiosity and looking at things, opening your mind, questioning things, looking at things differently, and also studying different aspects and different thought systems as well. And you seem like you're bringing all that into this community.
Yeah. God willing. So it'll be great to have you and everybody drop in. That'd
be great. Yeah. And it's great for any stage of life, but particularly if you're transitioning from this householder to forest dweller stage and you're looking to open up, like you said, what's behind the ambition, what's behind the drive, and start getting curious about what else needs to be nurtured there as well. And, if you're feeling that desire to let go a little and look into different aspects and like we talk about in the Vata stage of life, that it is about more introspective, it's more philosophical stage of life, right? And that curiosity and having that wonder about learning about different things where you may not have had the time in the Pitta stage of life.
Yeah, beautiful. I mean, it's such a powerful transition. I mean, one way of looking at it from Chinese medicine is the first half of life is earthbound, and the second half of life is heaven-bound. And we see that with Ayurveda too, because kapha is earth and water. That's the first part of life. And pitta is fire and water, which includes water. So there's water and earth govern the first stage of life very much. And the second stage of life is air and ether. It's more heavenly. It's more ethereal. And understanding that that's where we're headed is really important. And physiologically for women, you can see that. I mean, Chinese medicine talks about women's physiology being rooted in blood and men's physiology being rooted in qi. But I would say that at menopause, a woman's physiology changes from being rooted in blood to rooted in qi, rooted in prana.
Wow.
And just imagine the reorganization and restructuring of the most powerful systems in the body, and the whole endocrine system is shifting how, when, and what it does, so that our physiology is changing. And blood is liquid; it's more earthbound. Qi, it's more heavenly bound. We're going to have a different experience with how energy moves in our body, in our mind, what relieves problematic energetic stuckness is going to be different in the second stage of life. All kinds of things are changing. So giving ourselves the time and space to introspect, develop that subtle awareness to see, oh, that's different. It can help us have a very rich transition.
Beautiful. I'm so glad we had this conversation today, Dr. Welch. I feel like I could talk to you a lot longer. I know I need to let you go now. But before you go, you mentioned satsangam.net. I'm going to put that link in the show notes. Is there any other offerings that you want to mention right now before we finish up?
Yes, please. Please, 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 if you're a woman, if you can possibly take the Women's Health and Hormones Part 1 class. We talk about a lot of this. We ground it. It's about hormonal balance, but it's so much more interesting than that. And it gets into the nuts and bolts. And if you're Pitta and you really want to be convinced, please take this class. It's Women's Health and Hormones Part 1. It's on my website, Claudia Welch, welch.com. Just look under the online classes for that. The book, Balance Your Hormones, Balance Your Life, is also a very useful component. But together with the class, I just wish every woman would know these things. Exactly.
And that's it. We need to get the information out there so women understand what's happening, because I think a lot of people are very confused. They literally feel like they're losing their mojo, and it can be a scary time if you're not aware of what's going on.
Yes, it can be. And it can also be an incredible time. So
absolutely,
we have a lot of potential here, sisters.
Yes. With education and with the permission, you can have a beautiful transition and have the joy of looking into this wisdom stage of life and what's ahead for you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Colette. And thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Dr. Welch. It's always a pleasure. And come back and visit us again soon.
Love to, Colette. Take care.
Bye for now. Take care. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Dr. Welch. Such important information there. And if you think this episode will be helpful to family or friends, I would really appreciate it if you could share this episode with them so that we can get this important information out there. Please check out the show notes for all the links mentioned in this episode. And don't forget, I have that upcoming discounted digestive reset cleanse starting September 2nd. It would be lovely if you could come and join us, and we'll go through it together as a group, supporting each other and holding each other accountable. If you haven't already subscribed or followed the podcast, please do so. And if you would like to rate and review the podcast, I would really appreciate that. You can find me on social media under Elements Healing and Wellbeing on Instagram and Facebook. And thank you so much for tuning in and spending time listening to the podcast. I truly appreciate it. And until next time, take good care of yourself, be well, and bye for now. Slán go fóill.